The woman I had never seen before walked into the lawyer's office, holding a 10-year-old boy by the hand. She looked nervous. The boy looked confused. And then she said the words that made my heart stop. "This is Oliver. He's Bernard Taylor's biological son. My father, the man who abandoned me at a bus station when I was 12 years old." Smiled so wide I thought his face might crack. He leaned back in his chair like he had just won the lottery. His rental suit still had the tag hanging from the inside of the sleeve. He didn't even notice. He thought he had just stolen everything from me. But he didn't know my uncle like I did. I'm Grayson Taylor. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how the man who threw me away like garbage tried to steal from the only person who ever truly loved me. Let me take you back 17 years. Back to when everything changed. My childhood was chaos. My father, Roland Taylor, was what you might generously call a dreamer. Less generously, you'd call him a con man who kept conning himself. He was always chasing the next big deal, the next investment opportunity, the next scheme that would make us rich. None of them ever worked. I still remember the time he invested our grocery money, our actual food budget for the month, into a company that promised to revolutionize the snow cone industry. We lived in Arizona, out in the desert where it's 110 degrees and nobody is thinking about snow cones because they're too busy trying not to melt. My mother Denise wasn't much better. She was there physically, I guess, but emotionally, she had checked out years before. She spent most of her time complaining about my father's failures, while doing absolutely nothing to fix our situation. They were a perfect match in the worst possible way. Then came the day that changed everything. I was 12 years old. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had a math test the next day and I was worried about it. Funny how your brain holds on to stupid details like that. My parents told me we were going on a trip. They seemed excited, which would have been my first warning sign. They packed my bag, just a few clothes, nothing special, and drove me to my Uncle Bernie's house. "Just 2 weeks, buddy," my father said, ruffling my hair. "We've got some business to take care of. We'll call you every day." My mother didn't even get out of the car. She just waved from the window. Uncle Bernie stood on his porch and watched them drive away. I didn't know it then, but he had a look on his face like he already knew what was coming. 2 weeks turned into a month. The daily phone calls never happened. Not one. I sat by the phone every single evening for the first few weeks, waiting, hoping, making excuses for them. Maybe they're busy. Maybe the phone lines are bad. Maybe they'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Uncle Bernie tried to track them down. He hired someone to find them. And find them he did. In Nevada, living in a new apartment with new phone numbers, building new lives. Lives that didn't include me. They just forgot about me. Like I was a houseplant they left behind during a move. Inconvenient. Not worth the trouble. I cried for 3 days straight when Uncle Bernie finally told me the truth. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with emotional stuff. He was a businessman. A builder, a man who solved problems with blueprints and contracts, not hugs and soft words. But he sat with me every night. He didn't try to fix it or explain it away. He just sat there, letting me feel what I needed to feel. And then one evening, about a month after my parents disappeared, he sat me down in his living room. He looked uncomfortable, like he was about to give a speech he hadn't rehearsed. "Grayson," he said, "you're staying with me now, and I want you to understand something. This isn't because I have to take you in. It's because I want to. You're not a burden. You're family. Real family." I didn't fully understand what he meant until years later. Uncle Bernie was different from my father in every possible way. Where Roland was flashy and loud and always making promises he couldn't keep, Bernie was quiet, steady, reliable. He had built Taylor Construction Supply from nothing. Started with a single truck and a lot of determination, and turned it into a company that supplied half the construction projects in 3 counties. He never married, never had kids of his own. When I asked him about it once years later, he just shrugged and said some people aren't meant for that life. But there was something else. Something I didn't pick up on until I was older. Sometimes when he looked at me, there was this strange recognition in his eyes. Like he was seeing someone else. Someone from a long time ago. Once when I was about 14, I was complaining about my parents. Really going off about how unfair it was, how I didn't understand why they didn't want me. Uncle Bernie listened quietly, and then he said something that stuck with me. I know what it feels like when they don't choose you. I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head and changed the subject. It would take 17 years for me to understand what he was really saying. There was one more thing that happened when I first moved in with Uncle Bernie. One more person I need to tell you about. Hal Cunningham. Hal was Uncle Bernie's business partner. They'd been working together for over 20 years at that point. He was the sales guy, the schmoozer, the one who wined and dined clients. Bernie was the operations guy, the one who actually made things work. Hal did not like me. The very first week I lived with Bernie, I overheard them arguing in the study. The door was cracked open, and I was walking past on my way to the kitchen. "You're going to let some kid derail 40 years of work?" Hal was saying. His voice was sharp, annoyed. Bernie's response was calm but firm. "That kid is family. You wouldn't understand." Hal made a sound like it swallowed something sour. Family, right. And when you leave him everything someday. What happens to our agreement then? We cross that bridge when we come to it. I crept away before they could catch me listening, but I never forgot that conversation. Hal saw me as a threat from day one, a competitor for something he thought was rightfully his. At 12 years old, I didn't understand business or inheritance or any of that. I just knew that the man with the fake smile didn't want me there. And I knew even then that Uncle Bernie had chosen me anyway. I didn't know it at the time. But Uncle Bernie understood me better than anyone ever could. Because he had been exactly where I was. He had felt what I felt. He knew the particular kind of pain that comes when the people who are supposed to love you simply don't. But that secret would take 17 years to reveal itself. And when it did, it would change everything. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read everything. And it honestly makes my day to hear from you. Thank you so much for your support. Living with Uncle Bernie was like stepping into a different universe. For the first time in my life, I had stability. I had routine. I had someone who showed up when they said they would and kept their promises. Bernie wasn't the warm and fuzzy type. He didn't hug me every day or tell me he loved me all the time. That wasn't his style. But he showed up every single day, and that mattered more than any words ever could. He started teaching me the business when I was 14. Not in a child labor kind of way, more like an apprenticeship. He'd take me to job sites on weekends, show me how things worked, explain why certain materials were better than others. A man who can build something with his hands will never be helpless, he used to say. Even if you never work construction a day in your life, you should understand how things are made. He could negotiate $1 million contract over lunch, but sending an email took him 40 minutes and required emotional support. He once called me in a complete panic because he thought he had deleted the internet. Not a website, the entire internet. I had to drive over and show him that he just closed his browser. The man built an empire, but technology was his kryptonite. When I was 14, something important happened. Something I wouldn't fully understand until much later. Uncle Bernie started the legal process to adopt me. He didn't make a big deal about it. Didn't sit me down for some dramatic conversation. He just mentioned one day that he talked to a lawyer about making things official. "You're my family," he said. "Might as well have the paperwork to prove it." The court sent notices to my biological parents. They were required to respond, to show up to contest if they wanted to. They did nothing. Didn't respond to the letters. Didn't show up to the hearing. Didn't even acknowledge that it was happening. The judge terminated their parental rights based on abandonment. I sat in that courtroom with Uncle Bernie, and I watched a stranger in a black robe legally confirm what I had already known in my heart. My parents didn't want me, but someone did. The adoption was finalized when I was 15. Bernie became my legal father. I became Grayson Bernard Taylor. He gave me his middle name. We didn't celebrate, didn't throw a party. Bernie just took me out for steak and said, "Well, that's that. You're stuck with me now." I've never had a better meal in my life. Here's the thing about my biological father, Roland. He had no idea any of this happened. Not because it was secret. It was all public record. He just never cared enough to check. He appeared twice more over the years, and both times it was exactly what you'd expect. The first time I was 16, 4 years after he abandoned me. He showed up at Bernie's door like nothing had happened. All smiles and charm, talking about how much he'd missed his little brother. He needed money. Of course he did. Some investment opportunity. The next big thing. He'd double the money in 6 months, guaranteed. Bernie gave him $15,000 just to make him go away. Roland left without asking me a single question about my life. Didn't ask about school. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't ask anything at all. The second time I was 19. Roland was going through a divorce with Denise. Needed help with legal fees. Bernie gave him $25,000. Same pattern. Take the money, disappear. Don't look back. I realized something during that second visit. My father saw me, but he didn't see me. I was furniture. Background noise. The only thing in that house that interested him was the checkbook. By my mid-20s, I had graduated from community college with a business degree and was working full-time at Taylor Construction Supply. I knew the company inside and out. Bernie was grooming me to take over someday, and everyone knew it, including Hal, who got more bitter about it every year. I also met someone who changed my life. Her name was Sloane. We sat next to each other in an accounting class. She was smart and funny, and she didn't put up with any nonsense. When I finally told her about my parents, the whole ugly story, she just looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, their loss was Bernie's gain and mine. We got married 3 years after we met. Uncle Bernie walked me down the aisle. He told me later it was one of the happiest days of his life. I believe him. I'd never seen him smile like that before. But while I was building this good life, something dark was growing in the background. When I was 26, Uncle Bernie's health started to seriously decline. Heart problems. The doctor said he needed to slow down, take it easy, manage his stress. Bernie was not good at any of those things. I started going to appointments with him, managing his medications, making sure he actually followed the doctor's orders. Uncle Bernie ignored his symptoms for almost 2 years before I literally dragged him to a cardiologist. If I hadn't pushed, he might not have had those extra years with me. That's why I get a full checkup every single year now. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Around this time, Bernie hired a new personal assistant. Her name was Maureen Webb. Mid-40s, efficient professional. She seemed perfect for the job. Too perfect, maybe. I noticed things, small things. The way she always seemed to be listening a little too closely. The questions she asked that went beyond her job description. The way she'd suddenly appear in rooms where she had no reason to be. One evening I walked into Bernie's study to grab a file. Maureen was there on her phone, whispering intensely. The moment she saw me, she hung up mid-sentence. Personal call, she said, with a tight smile. Sorry about that. I mentioned it to Bernie later. He just nodded slowly, that thoughtful look on his face, and said I'll keep an eye on it. I didn't know it then, but Bernie already knew exactly who Maureen was working for, and he was using her. Everything seemed fine on the surface. Bernie was managing his health, the business was thriving, I had Sloane, I had purpose, I had a future. But underneath it all, 2 people were already plotting. 2 people who saw my uncle's illness as an opportunity. 2 people who were counting down the days until they could take everything he had built. One of them was his own brother. And one of them was sitting in his office every day, listening to every conversation and reporting back everything she heard. 6 months before he died, Uncle Bernie called me into his study and closed the door. He looked tired. He always looked tired those days. But there was something sharp in his eyes, something focused, like the Bernie from 20 years ago. The one who built a business from nothing through sheer willpower. Sit down, he said. There are things I need to tell you, and I need you to stay calm. I sat. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Set it between us. I hired a private investigator, he said. About 2 years ago, when my health first started going bad. I stared at him. You what? Your father and Al have been talking regularly, since about a month after my diagnosis became serious. The words hit me like cold water. Roland and Al, together. Bernie nodded. They're planning something. Your father has already consulted with a lawyer about contesting my will. He's going to claim I was mentally incapacitated in my final years, that you manipulated me, that any inheritance you receive should be invalidated. I felt sick. He can't do that, can he? He can try. He will try. And Hal is helping him. Bernie slid the folder toward me. Inside were photographs, phone records, meeting notes from the investigator. Roland and Al at a restaurant. Roland and Al in a parking lot. Roland and Al on the phone. Timestamps, durations, frequency. They've been planning this for almost 2 years, Bernie said. While I was going to doctor's appointments and trying to stay alive, my own brother was figuring out how to steal from me after I died. I couldn't speak. I just kept flipping through the pages, watching my father's betrayal documented in black and white. There's more, Bernie said. I looked up. Maureen. My stomach dropped. The assistant. Bernie nodded. I figured it out about 6 months after I hired her. She reports to Hal. Maybe to Roland too. Everything she hears, everything she sees goes straight back to them. Then why didn't you fire her? Bernie almost smiled. Because if I fire her, they find another way in. A way I can't see or control. This way I know exactly where the leak is and I control what information flows through it. I started to understand. You've been feeding her false information for over a year now. She thinks my will is simple and straightforward, easy to contest. She thinks my documentation is sloppy, that I haven't prepared properly. She thinks you'll be vulnerable after I'm gone. He leaned back in his chair. She's wrong. Bernie pulled out another document. This one had a law firm letterhead. Patricia Vance, attorney at law. This is my real will, he said. Prepared with Patricia over the last 3 years, airtight, documented, witnessed. Backed up by video depositions I recorded while I was still in good health, certified by independent physicians. He turned to a specific page and pointed. And this is the part your father doesn't know about. I read the clause, then read it again. If any beneficiary or party to this estate introduces fraudulent claims, falsified documentation, or presents false pretenders to the inheritance, that party shall immediately forfeit all inheritance rights. Their designated share will transfer to the Bernard Taylor Foundation for Disadvantaged Youth. I looked at him. False pretenders. The investigator found something else. Bernie's expression darkened. Roland and Hal have been meeting with a woman. They're building a case. They're going to claim I had a biological child that no one knew about. The pieces clicked together. They're going to bring someone to the will reading, I said slowly. Someone who claims to be your son or daughter or long lost anything. Doesn't matter what the story is. The point is to create chaos to invalidate my wishes, to tie everything up in court until they can negotiate a settlement. But if they do that, they trigger the clause. They forfeit everything. They destroy themselves. The private investigator. This guy looked like he walked straight out of a 1940s detective movie, by the way. Trench coat, hat, the whole aesthetic. Turns out he's a former accountant who just really loves the look. But he's thorough, I'll give him that. His reports were meticulous. Every meeting documented, every phone call logged, financial movements tracked. Most importantly, he found records of a payment. $50,000 transferred from Hal's company account to a woman named Christine Novak. The payment was disguised as a consulting fee. Hal paid her, I asked. 3 months ago, she has a son, about 10 years old. They're going to claim the boy is mine. Bernie closed the folder. When they bring her into that room, Patricia will let them make their claim. Let them present their evidence. And then, she'll show everyone what we have. The photographs, The financial records. The proof that it's all a lie. And they lose everything. They lose everything. I sat there trying to process it all. My uncle, the quiet builder, the man who solved problems with hard work and patience. He had been playing chess for years. While everyone thought he was just a sick old man waiting to die, he was preparing a fortress. Why? I finally asked. Why go through all this trouble? You could have just left everything to charity. Cut everyone out. Bernie looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Because you deserve what I built, he said simply. You're my son, legally, really, in every way that matters. And I'm not going to let anyone take that from you. He reached into his desk again and pulled out a sealed envelope, handed it to me. One more thing. This is for you, but you can't open it until after the will reading. No matter what happens in that room. Promise me. I took the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. What is it? The truth about me. Something I should have told you a long time ago. There was guilt in his voice. And something else. Sadness maybe. Or relief. Uncle Bernie. Promise me, Grayson. I nodded. I promise. He stood up slowly, the way old men do when their bodies don't work the way they used to. One more thing, when the time comes, I need you to handle everything with dignity. No screaming, no fighting. No matter what your father says or does. I don't know if I can do that. You can, because I raised you, and because the documents will speak for themselves. Let them hang themselves, Grayson. You just sit there, and be the man I know you are. I left that study with my head spinning. My uncle had been preparing for this for years. Legal documents, video evidence, witness statements, financial records. A trap so perfectly constructed that the people walking into it wouldn't even see the walls closing in until it was too late. But that envelope weighed heavy in my pocket. What truth had Bernie been hiding all these years? What secret had he carried alone for so long? I wouldn't find out until after he was gone. And when I did, it would break my heart and heal it at the same time. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the channel more than you know, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you. Now back to the story. 3 months after that conversation in his study, Uncle Bernie died. It was peaceful, if death can ever be called that. He was at home in his own bed, in the house he had lived in for 40 years. I was holding his hand. Sloane was in the doorway, giving us space, but close enough if I needed her. His breathing had been getting slower all day. The hospice nurse said it wouldn't be long. I had sent everyone else away. I wanted it to be just us at the end. His eyes opened one last time. They were clear, present. He knew exactly where he was and who was with him. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, son, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. Remember that, son. He had called me that before plenty of times. But in that moment, with his hands growing cold in mine. The word carried the weight of everything we had been through together. Then he closed his eyes and he was gone. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. Sloane eventually came in and put her hand on my shoulder. And at some point, the hospice nurse came to do what needed to be done. And the funeral home people arrived. And the whole machinery of death started moving around me. But I just sat there, holding the hand of the man who had chosen me when no one else would. The funeral was 3 days later. Half the town showed up. Bernie wasn't a flashy man, but he was respected. He had given jobs to hundreds of people over the years. He had donated to every charity that asked. He had built things that would outlast him. Buildings, businesses, lives. The church was standing room only. I gave the eulogy. I don't remember most of what I said. I just remember looking out at all those faces and thinking that every single one of them had a Bernie story. A time he helped them, a deal he made fairly, a problem he solved without asking for credit. And then I looked at the front row and I saw the vultures. Roland arrived in an expensive suit. Rented, of course. I recognized the cut and sure enough, there was the tag still hanging from the inside of the sleeve. He hadn't even noticed. This was the man who was planning to outsmart my uncle. He couldn't even manage to look presentable. He played the grieving brother perfectly, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief, shaking hands with mourners. Bernie and I were so close, he kept saying. I can't believe he's gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by his rented lapels and drag him out of the church. But I remembered my promise. Dignity. Let them hang themselves. Denise showed up separately. She and Roland had been divorced for years at this point. But apparently, death brings everyone out of the woodwork. She wore a black dress that was slightly too tight and sunglasses that she never took off, even inside the church. She tried to hug me after the service. I know we've had our differences, she said, her voice dripping with practiced emotion. But family is family. I stepped back before she could touch me. You're 17 years too late for that speech. She made a huffing sound and walked away to find better angles for her grief performance. Probably wanted to make sure people saw her crying. And then there was Hal. Hal Cunningham gave a speech about 40 years of partnership. It lasted 15 minutes. He mentioned Bernie maybe twice. The rest was about himself, his contributions, his sacrifices, his vision for the company. I watched his hands while he spoke. They were shaking. Nerves, anticipation, I couldn't tell. After the reception, I stepped outside for some air. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Roland was in the parking lot talking to a woman I didn't recognize. She was blonde, mid-30s, nervous looking. A boy stood beside her, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and anxious eyes. Roland handed her something, an envelope thick with papers. She nodded quickly, clutching it to her chest. Then she saw me watching. Her face went pale. She grabbed the boy's hand and hurried to her car. Roland turned around and noticed me. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt maybe, or fear. Then he smiled. That salesman smile. Grayson, there you are. Beautiful service, wasn't it? Bernie would have loved it. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just turned and walked back inside. The secret child scheme. It was happening just like Bernie had predicted. That evening I got a call from Patricia Vance. We have a situation, she said. Someone filed preliminary documents to contest the will before the funeral was even over. My father and someone else filed a notice of potential claim on behalf of a minor child. They are claiming Bernie had a biological son. I closed my eyes. Christine Novak. Silence on the line. You know about this? Bernie told me before he died. He knew they were planning something. Then you know, we are prepared. I could hear the smile in her voice. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? There are things we need to discuss before the reading. Patricia's office was downtown in one of those old brick buildings that lawyers love because it makes them look established. She had been Bernie's attorney for over 20 years. She knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She spread the documents across her conference table. Your father is claiming Bernie was mentally incapacitated in his final years, that you exerted undue influence, that any inheritance should be invalidated. Can you win? Not a chance. She pulled out a thick binder. Your uncle recorded video depositions over a year ago, clear-headed, articulate, witnessed by 2 independent physicians who certified his mental competency. He also kept detailed records of every decision he made, every meeting he attended, every document he signed. The man built a paper trail that would make the IRS jealous. She set down another folder. And then there's this. Photographs. Roland and Hal meeting at a restaurant. Roland and Christine in a parking lot. Hal's company bank statements showing the $50,000 consulting fee. They filed a request for Miss Novak and her son to be present at the reading, Patricia said as potential beneficiaries. You agreed I did. I stared at her. Why would you do that? Patricia's smile was almost predatory. Because I want them to expose themselves publicly. I want them to make their claims, present their evidence, commit to their story on the record, and then I want to show everyone in that room exactly what they've done. You're setting a trap. Your uncle set the trap. I'm just making sure the door is closed when they walk in. The night before the will reading, I sat alone in Bernie's study. My study now, I suppose, though it didn't feel like mine yet. The leather chair still smelled like him. The books on the shelves were ones he had collected over decades. The sealed envelope sat on the desk in front of me. Every part of me wanted to open it. To know his secret before walking into that room. To understand what he had been carrying all those years. But I had made a promise. I picked up the envelope, felt its weight, held it for a long moment. Then I slid it into my jacket pocket and went to bed. I didn't sleep. Tomorrow, everyone who had ever tried to take from Uncle Bernie would be in one room. My father, my mother, his partner of 40 years, a stranger, and her child, ready to claim something that wasn't theirs. And somewhere in a sealed envelope was a truth that would change how I understood everything. Whatever happened, I would face it with dignity. I owed Bernie that much. The conference room at Patricia Vance's law office was designed to intimidate. Dark mahogany table, leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes that nobody had probably opened in decades. I arrived early with Sloane. We sat near Patricia's end of the table, closest to the door that led to her private office. I wanted to see everyone as they came in. Hal Cunningham arrived next. He had brought his own attorney, a sleek-looking guy with an expensive watch and a smile that never reached his eyes. They took seats on the opposite side of the table, spreading out like they owned the place. Then, Roland walked in. He had his lawyer with him too. Young guy, couldn't have been more than a few years out of law school. He looked nervous, kept adjusting his tie and checking his phone. Roland, on the other hand, looked confident, smug even. He nodded at me as he sat down. "Grayson, how are you holding up?" I didn't answer. Denise slipped in last, alone, positioning herself near Roland, but not too close. She was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though no one had said anything yet. The room was silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Patricia entered from her private office, carrying several folders. She sat at the head of the table, arranged her papers neatly, and looked around the room. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this reading is being recorded for legal purposes. Everything said in this room is on the record. She opened the first folder. The last will and testament of Bernard Andrew Taylor, dated 18 months ago. I will read the relevant sections and then address any questions. She began with the standard legal language, declarations of sound mind, revocations of previous wills, the stuff that lawyers love and everyone else finds boring. Then she got to the bequests. To my long-time employees at Taylor Construction Supply, I leave the following gifts in recognition of their years of service. She read through a list of names and amounts. Modest sums for the most part. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, enough to matter to the people receiving them. Additionally, I direct that $50,000 be donated to the Regional Trade School Scholarship Fund to be used for students pursuing careers in construction and skilled trades. Roland shifted in his seat. Hal drummed his fingers on the table. They were waiting for the real numbers. Patricia turned the page. To my business partner of 40 years, Harold James Cunningham. Hal sat up straighter. His lawyer leaned in. I leave his original capital investment in Taylor Construction Supply, adjusted for inflation, totaling $47,500. The room went silent. Then Hal exploded. That's it, 47,000. I gave 40 years of my life to that company. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. Mr. Cunningham, please. There was an agreement, a handshake deal. Bernie promised me half of everything when he died. Patricia remained perfectly calm. Mr. Cunningham, if you have documentation of such an agreement, you are welcome to present it to the courts. This will reflect Mr. Taylor's documented wishes as of 18 months ago. Documentation. We didn't need documentation. We were partners. We trusted each other. Then I suggest you trust the process. If you have a legitimate claim, pursue it through the proper legal channels. Hal's lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear. Hal's face was red, his hands clenched into fists on the table. 40 years of handshake deals and nothing on paper. He had trusted Bernie, and Bernie apparently had kept a very careful track of who deserved what. Patricia waited for the commotion to settle, then continued. To Denise Marie Taylor. Denise sat up, clutching her tissue. I leave the sum of $1. Denise gasped. What? That's all? That's all I get. Patricia pulled out a small envelope, accompanied by this note, which Mr. Taylor asked me to read aloud. She unfolded a piece of paper. For the 12 years of child support you never paid, which I covered entirely. Consider us even. Bernie. Denise's face went through several colors. Red, white, purple. This is outrageous. I was the mother of his nephew. I have rights. You have the rights specified in this will, Patricia said evenly. $1 and a note. Roland put a hand on Denise's arm, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the door, waiting for something. Then the door opened. A woman walked in. Blonde, mid-30s, nervous. A boy beside her, maybe 10 years old. He looked confused and a little scared. He didn't want to be there. I recognized them from the parking lot at the funeral. Roland's entire demeanor changed. He sat up straighter, his shoulders relaxed. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. I'm Christine Novak, the woman said. Her voice was shaky. This is my son, Oliver. I'm here regarding the estate of Bernard Taylor. Patricia nodded. Please, have a seat. We've been expecting you. Christine sat down at the far end of the table, pulling Oliver close beside her. A man I hadn't noticed came in behind her, her own attorney apparently. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure he wanted to be associated with whatever was about to happen. Ms. Novak Patricia said you filed a notice of potential claim on behalf of your son. Would you like to present your case? Christine's attorney stepped forward. He cleared his throat nervously. Ms. Novak had a relationship with Bernard Taylor approximately 11 years ago. As a result of that relationship, her son Oliver was born. We have documentation establishing the timeline of this relationship, including correspondence and other evidence. We believe Oliver is entitled to inherit as Mr. Taylor's direct biological descendant. He handed a folder to Patricia. I felt the floor dropping out from under me. If this was true, if Bernie had a biological child, everything changed. Blood as priority. All of Bernie's preparation, all of his documentation might not matter. Sloane grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed. Roland was practically glowing. Al had stopped complaining about his $47,000. Even Denise had perked up, sensing opportunity. I looked at Patricia. She was calm. Too calm. She flipped through the documents Christine's attorney had provided, nodding occasionally, her expression unreadable. Then she set the folder aside. Thank you for that presentation. Before we proceed, I need to read a specific clause from Mr. Taylor's will. She picked up the original document and turned to a marked page. Section 14. Subsection C. If any beneficiary or party to this estate introduces fraudulent claims, falsified documentation, or presents false pretenders to the inheritance, that party shall immediately forfeit all inheritance rights. Their designated share will transfer to the Bernard Taylor Foundation for Disadvantaged Youth. The room went very quiet. Patricia opened a different folder, a thick one. Mr. Taylor anticipated this situation. He hired a private investigator over 2 years ago, when his health first began to decline. That investigator has been very thorough. She laid the first photograph on the table. Roland, Al and Christine at a restaurant date-stamped 3 months ago. Another photograph, the same 3 in a parking lot. Another and another. These meetings began approximately 3 months ago, Patricia said. Shortly before Ms. Novak received a payment of $50,000 from Mr. Cunningham's company account. She pulled out bank statements highlighted, dated, undeniable. The payment was categorized as a consulting fee. Ms. Novak has no consulting business, no relevant expertise, no prior relationship with Mr. Cunningham's company. Al's face went white. Roland's smile had vanished. Additionally, we have phone records showing extensive communication between Mr. Roland Taylor and Miss Novak over the past 3 months. Dozens of calls, often late at night. She laid the phone records on the table, timestamps, durations, everything. Documented. Christine was trembling. Oliver had started to cry quietly, not understanding what was happening, but sensing that it was very bad. Patricia looked directly at Christine. Miss Novak, I want to give you an opportunity to clarify your statement. On the record. Is Oliver the biological son of Bernard Taylor? The room held its breath. Christine looked at Roland. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at Al. He was staring at the table. She looked at her own attorney. He gave a tiny shake of his head. Then she broke. They told me it would be easy money, she whispered. They said no one would check. They said I just had to show up and tell a story, and I'd get another 50,000 when it was done. Who told you this? Christine pointed at Roland, then at Hal. Both of them. They approached me at a bar 3 months ago. They knew I needed money. They said I just had to pretend. She couldn't finish. She was crying now. Oliver was crying too, burying his face in her sleeve. Roland stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous! This is entrapment! You can't! Patricia's voice was ice. I strongly advise you to remain seated. These documents have been forwarded to the district attorney's office. We are looking at conspiracy to commit fraud. Filing false claims against an estate, potentially other charges. Roland's young attorney looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His left eye had started twitching somewhere around the word district attorney and hadn't stopped since. I had nothing to do with this, Roland sputtered. This was all Hal's idea. I was just... Hal shouted, shut your mouth. Don't tell me to shut up. You're the one who said it was foolproof. You're the one who paid her. They were turning on each other just like Bernie knew they would. Patricia let them argue for a moment. Then she held up her hand. Gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, the clause I read earlier is now in effect. By introducing a false pretender to this estate, you have both forfeited any inheritance rights you might have had. Your shares, such as they were, will transfer to the Bernard Taylor Foundation. She turned back to her documents. Now, regarding the primary heir. The room fell silent. Even Roland and Al stopped their bickering. All remaining assets, Taylor Construction Supply. All real estate holdings, all investment accounts, all liquid assets passed to Grayson Bernard Taylor. Roland made a sound like a wounded animal. He's just a nephew, he spat. Blood matters in inheritance law. Everyone knows that. Patricia smiled. It was not a kind smile. Mr. Taylor, perhaps you should have paid more attention to your son's life. Grayson was legally adopted by Bernard Taylor 15 years ago. The adoption was finalized when he was 15 years old. You were notified of the proceedings. You did not respond. You did not appear. Roland's face went slack. Grayson is not a nephew, Patricia continued. He is legally and completely Bernard Taylor's son, his only son, and as such, he is the sole heir to this estate. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I had known about the adoption, of course. I had been there, but hearing it stated in this room, in front of everyone who had tried to take what Bernie built, it felt different. It felt final. It felt real. Bernie had made it official. Not just in his heart. But on paper, in the eyes of the law, in every way that mattered, I was his son. And nothing my biological father did could ever take that away. They escorted Roland and Al out separately. Both were still arguing, still blaming each other, still convinced somehow that they were the victims in all of this. Christine gave a full statement to Patricia's office that afternoon. The district attorney was very interested in what she had to say. She cooperated fully in exchange for consideration. She was a desperate woman who had made a terrible choice, not a criminal mastermind. Oliver was taken care of. Social services connected them with resources. He was just a child caught in adult schemes. He didn't deserve any of what had happened. I sat in that conference room long after everyone else had left. Sloane beside me, her hand in mine. The sealed envelope was still in my pocket. Uncle Bernie had won. Even from beyond the grave, he had protected me. He had predicted every move, anticipated every betrayal, built a fortress of documentation and evidence that his enemies never saw coming. But the biggest revelation was still waiting. I reached into my pocket and touched the envelope. The weeks after the will reading were chaos. Roland and Al both faced charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. The district attorney took a personal interest in the case. Apparently, he'd known Bernie had bought supplies from the company for years and was not pleased to learn how certain people had tried to take advantage of a dying man. Hal had to sell his house to cover legal fees. Last I heard, he was working as a consultant somewhere, telling anyone who would listen about how he had been cheated by the system, how 40 years of partnership meant nothing, how he was the real victim. Some people never learn. Roland tried one more angle. Emotional damages, pain and suffering. The usual desperate nonsense. It went nowhere. His own lawyer dropped him as a client after the will reading debacle. He slunk back to whatever life he'd built without me, probably already planning his next scheme. Denise never contacted me again. I think she finally understood that there was nothing left to extract. Some people only have room in their hearts for themselves. She was one of them. Maureen. The assistant was fired immediately after we discovered the full extent of her involvement. She wasn't charged with anything. She genuinely thought she was helping the real family and didn't know about the fraud scheme. But her reputation was destroyed. The last I heard, she had moved to another state to start over. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The company transition was smoother than I expected. The employees had been worried about what would happen after Bernie's death. Some had feared Hal would take over. Others worried about outside buyers, corporate traders, the usual nightmare scenarios. When they learned it was me, the kid who had grown up in the warehouse, who had learned the business from the ground up, who had sat in Bernie's office, learning spreadsheets and contracts, and the art of the handshake deal, they were relieved. Your uncle made the right choice. The warehouse manager told me, "You're one of us." I tried to live up to that. The first week in Bernie's office, my office now, I mostly just sat there. The leather chair still smelled like him. The coffee mug on the desk still had a faint ring from his last cup. The books on the shelves were ones he had collected over decades, each one with notes in the margins. Thoughts and ideas captured in his careful handwriting. I missed him so much, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. But I had one more thing to do. 1 month after the will reading, when the chaos had settled and the lawyers had stopped calling every day, and the company was running smoothly under my management, I finally sat down to open the envelope. It was a Sunday evening. Sloane was in the kitchen making tea. She had offered to give me privacy, but I asked her to stay close. Whatever was in that envelope, I didn't want to face it alone. I turned it over in my hands. Heavy cream paper. Bernie's handwriting on the front. For Grayson, after everything is finished. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter. Several pages handwritten, and behind it, a photograph I had never seen before. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, skinny, serious looking, standing in front of a building with a sign that read Street, Andrew's Home for Children. I didn't recognize the boy, but something about his eyes looked familiar. I started reading. Dear Grayson, if you're reading this, everything went according to plan. And before you start thinking I was some kind of genius, let me stop you right there. I wasn't. I just knew my brother. Some people never change, and Roland is one of them. But that's not why I'm writing this letter. There's something I never told you. Something I never told anyone, not in my whole life. And I need you to know it now because I think it will help you understand why I made the choices I made. I was adopted. The Taylors, the people you knew as your grandparents, they weren't my biological family. They took me in when I was 2 years old. I was too young to remember anything from before. Too young to remember the people who gave me up. I didn't know any of this until I was 19. After Mom and Dad, the Taylors, after they passed, I was going through their papers, settling the estate, and I found documents I had never seen before. Birth certificate, adoption records, a whole file about who I was before I became Bernard Taylor. My biological parents left me at an orphanage when I was just a few months old. There was a note apparently, but nobody saved it. I don't know what it said. I don't know why they did it. I never found out. Maybe I never wanted to. The photo in this envelope is from the orphanage St. Andrew's Home for Children. It closed down in 1970. I went back once when I was in my 30s. Just an empty lot. Nothing left. Roland doesn't know any of this. He was born 5 years after I was adopted. The Taylors never told him. It was a different time back then. People didn't talk about these things. They wanted him to think we were blood brothers. And so that's what he thought. I found out the truth and I kept it to myself. What was the point of telling him he'd already decided I was his older brother? And knowing the truth wouldn't have changed anything. He was always going to be Roland. Charming, selfish, looking for the easy score. For a long time, I didn't think much about being adopted. I had a good life, good parents, a good business. What did it matter where I came from? Then you showed up. I remember that day so clearly. You were 12 years old, scared, confused, trying so hard not to cry. Your parents had just driven away and you were standing on my porch with a little suitcase, trying to figure out what you had done wrong. And I looked at you, Grayson, and I saw myself. Not physically, but that look in your eyes, that desperate hope that someone would explain why you weren't enough, why they didn't want to keep you, why the people who were supposed to love you just left. I knew that feeling. I had carried it my whole life. Even though I didn't have memories of my own abandonment, it was in my bones, in my blood. The knowledge that I had been given away like something worthless. And I decided right there on that porch that I would never let you feel that way again. You were never a burden, Grayson. You need to know that you were never an obligation or a duty or a problem to be solved. You were the answer to a question I didn't even know I was still asking. I spent my whole life building things. The business, the reputation, the money, and for what? There was nobody to share it with. Nobody to pass it to. Nobody to make proud. I used to lie awake at night wondering what the point of it all was. I had everything a man is supposed to want, and I felt empty. Then you came along. You gave me a reason for everything. You gave me someone to teach someone, to protect someone, to leave it all to someone. To love. You made me a father, a real father. Not the kind who gives up, not the kind who walks away, the kind who stays, the kind who fights, the kind who plans for years to make sure his son is protected. That was worth more than every dollar I ever made. So here's what I need you to understand. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. Your biological parents had your blood and they threw you away. I chose you. I chose to raise you. I chose to adopt you. I chose to spend 17 years making sure you had everything you needed to build a good life. And in return, you gave me something I never thought I'd have. You gave me a family. Run the company well. Take care of Sloan. Build something good. And when you see a kid out there who's lost and scared and doesn't know if anyone will ever choose them, remember where we both came from. Remember that you have the power to be the person who stays. That's your inheritance. Not the money, not the business. The knowledge that chosen family is the strongest kind there is. I love you, son. I always have. I always will. Your father, the real one, Bernie. I read the letter 3 times. The first time, I couldn't see through the tears. The second time, I started to understand. The third time, I finally got it. Uncle Bernie hadn't just saved me, I had saved him too. 2 abandoned boys who found each other across the years. 2 people who knew what it felt like to be thrown away. 2 halves of a family that was never supposed to exist. He saw himself in me. That's what he had meant all those years ago when he said he knew what it felt like when they don't choose you. He wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was speaking from experience, from a wound he had carried alone for his entire life. Sloan came in and found me crying over the letter. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside me and held my hand and let me feel what I needed to feel, just like Bernie used to do. 1 year later, I stood at Bernie's grave. The headstone was simple. He would have wanted it that way. Just his name, his dates, and 3 words he had chosen himself. Builder of things that last. Sloane stood beside me, her hand resting on her stomach. 5 months pregnant. A boy. "We're naming him Bernard," I said to the stone. "Bernie Jr. He's going to know who he's named after. He's going to know everything, the whole story. How his grandfather was a builder, how he saved a scared kid who had nowhere else to go, how he planned for years to protect his family from people who didn't deserve to call themselves that." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. "The foundation is doing well," I continued. "The Bernie Taylor Fresh Start Initiative. We've got 12 kids in the first class, some from foster care, some from families like mine was. All of them looking for someone to believe in them." I thought about what Bernie had written about being the person who stays the person who chooses. "I'm trying to be like you," I said. "I don't know if I'll ever be as good at it, but I'm trying." Sloane squeezed my hand. We stood there for a few more minutes, just the two of us, and the memory of the man who had changed everything. Then we walked back to the car, back to our life, back to the future Bernie had made possible. The man who abandoned me showed up to claim what he thought he deserved. He thought blood was enough. He thought showing up at the last minute entitled him to the fruits of someone else's labor, someone else's love, someone else's life. He was wrong. Because the man who raised me knew something my biological father never understood. Something that took me 29 years and 1 devastating letter to finally learn. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You will love it. See you in the next one!